Now that we've gotten our ASP.NET Core 6 app created, and we know how to run and debug it, it's time for us to start creating the actual functionality that we want on our site. And since we're using the MVC template, that means we need to get into MVC itself. This is the architectural pattern of models, views, and controllers, and we're going to create our own instances of these for products during this module. Here's a quick slide to clarify the simplest relationship between controllers and views and the conventions used by ASP.NET Core. Controllers are C# classes with a name of something and controller. So this controller is Products Controller. It's the controller for products. Note also that most controllers that we define will inherit from a base class of controller, and they're commonly in a folder called, guess what, controllers. They'll generally have some public methods that return iActionResult, and the return statement that does that will be some kind of invocation of the view method defined on that base class. These types of public methods in controllers are often referred to as actions. The way that the framework locates the view that should be rendered is by convention. It'll look at the name of the controller minus the actual word controller, so products in this example, and then it'll look at the name of the method, index. To find the view, it's going to look in the views folder for a subfolder that matches the controller name. Products is here, and then for a view file that matches the method name. If it can't find anything, it'll also check the shared folder under views. Let's put these concepts, conventions, and syntax to use now by creating our own products controller and view. Here we are in VS Code again, and one thing you might notice is that your view of the folder contents might look a little different than mine. If you type Control, comma to get to the settings view, and then start typing exclude in the search bar, you'll see that I've got some things added that I don't want to see in VS Code, including the IDEA and VS folders created by those other IDEs, SLN and .user files also created by those IDEs, and the bin and OBJ folders, which contain compiled output from when we build, run, and debug our code. These settings are definitely not a requirement, but I find it easier to focus on the real code by adding these things to the exclude list. We're going to add a controller and view completely from scratch here, so start by adding a new file to the controllers folder, and call it productscontroller.cs. If you're using one of the other IDEs, adding files can sometimes give you some starting code, or you can find some snippet packs for VS Code that can help. We're going to go completely by hand here, and we should define a namespace for the new controller we're creating. That's going to be carvedrock.admin.controllers, named for the folders that this file lives in. And this is using a file level namespace, which means I can just add a semicolon here rather than add curly braces and have to indent everything else in the file. Then we'll add a line to declare our class called productsController, again in Pascal case, and it'll inherit from controller. VS Code may get a little aggressive with its suggestions here, so I'll undo its suggestion, and that leaves us with the word controller as the class we want to inherit from, and it's showing some red squiggles. And then a yellow tip suggests the fix, adding a using statement that allows us to use the class name of controller that's defined in another namespace, namely Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC. Then I can add the curly braces and define a public method that'll return an iActionResult. And I'll give it a name of index, which will make it the default view for this controller based on the routing setup we saw earlier in program.cs. The body of the method can just return a view for now. Let's see if we can get this wired up and working first, then we'll add some products to it. To define the view, we'll create a products folder within views, and then an index.cshtml file. CSHTML is the extension we use for views in an ASP.NET Core web project, and it implies some C# code with the HTML for our views. I'll quickly peek at the existing index view in the home folder to grab a little snippet from the top. I'll paste that into our products index view, and what it's doing is using some C# code, which gets invoked with the @ character, to set a title in the view data to homepage, which I'll change to products. This is referenced in the shared layout page to set the title of the browser window. Now we can just add some markup. I'll add an h1 tag with some content, and then let's see if we can see our new products view in the browser. If you used .NET Watch with me before, you may want to go back to the Debug tab and choose the .NET Run Debug option, But let's run the project. Okay, it's come up just fine, but the products page is not listed in the nav items at the top. That's fine for now, and we can just add /products to the address bar. And there's our Hello MVC World. The product's title shows up in the tab title as well. Great. Let's make one tweak to get a link added to the nav bar. Back to VS Code, stop the project, and I'll go to the Shared Layout view. Note here where the view data title is referenced to set the HTML title. But now let's scroll down to see the nav menu, and I'll collapse the file view so we can see this a little better. The nav items for home and privacy are here. Let's add one for our new products page. I'll copy the home link and paste it back in. Then I'll update the ASP-controller attribute to be products and the text of the link to be products. Save it with Ctrl-S and hit F5 to run again. Our site comes up and there's the products link. And it takes us to our new page. This is great. But there's maybe a little magic going on here that we should clarify in the next clip. We've just seen a few things inside the HTML markup that bear a little clarification. We've seen an A tag with properties called ASP-controller and ASP-action. These are what's called tag helpers, and they're part of the ASP.NET Core framework. Another thing we've seen is some C# code embedded in the view files, like where we set the title value within view data to be home or products or whatever. These are called Razor sequences, and they're started with the @ character. Both of these things are syntax that we can use inside Razor views, both tag helpers and Razor sequences. You couldn't use these on normal HTML files. This syntax needs to be in files with a CS-HTML extension. Of course, there's much more to both tag helpers and Razor sequences that we haven't seen yet. We'll definitely be seeing more in this course, but even then, there's much we won't get into, and this is a good segue into the docs. There's a new file I've added in the project starting in this module for the exercise files, and it's in the GitHub repo too. It's the README, which is a markdown file, and you should be able to use the preview feature in VS Code to see a nice version of it here. I'll collapse the file view and make the preview a little wider, and it's got some notes about the project we're working on. At the bottom of the file, it has some links to doc references, and the little UI block has a link to both tag helpers and Razor syntax. Let's have a look. Here's the docs page about the various tag helpers you can use, and you can see there are quite a few. You can also see by the left nav that the docs are pretty extensive and cover a lot of ground. If we look at the anchor tag helpers and scroll down just a little bit, there you can see the ASP controller and ASP action that we just used in that nav menu. The Razor docs are similarly helpful and are there for you to explore on your own. Now let's get back to our code and add some products into the mix. Now we need to address the M in MVC. We'll be adding a model into our view and controller. Adding a model to a view is done by defining the type of the model for the view at the top of the CS-HTML file with the @model directive. Once you've done that, you can reference the model throughout the view markup with various kinds of Razor syntax. This can be done by using the @model property, and note the capital M here. And there's also an HTML helper that you'll frequently see used. This takes a lambda with an argument representing the instance, and you can dereference properties and things from there. Tag helpers can also provide access into the model as well. Finally, the model instance gets passed to the view from the controller when it calls return view. Let's jump right into it and get some products into our app. Here's our project, and we'll jump right into it. I'll add a new file to the models folder and call it productModel.cs. Then we'll define the class itself in the same way we did for controllers. Add a namespace for carvedrock.admin.models based on the folder the class is in, and then a public class declaration called productModel. This will be what's referred to as a POCO, or plain old CLR object. CLR is the common language runtime for .NET. This just means that it has some basic automatic properties. Now I'll paste in those properties. We have an integer ID, a name, a description, a price, and a boolean to indicate whether the product is active or not. And that's it for the model for now. Simple enough. Now let's add some code to our controller to define a list of actual product model instances. I'll add a constructor to the controller class, and then I'll add a property to the class that will be a list of our products, and I'll call that property products. Aha, but it'll help if I use the class name of product model here. Note that there's nothing special about adding the word model to the class name. I'm doing this to distinguish this class from a different class we'll use for a database access later in the course. Okay, so now that we've got the property corrected and a using statement added, we can set the property inside the constructor. I'll use a new method called getSampleProducts. Then I'll do some copy pasting to define the new private method. It's returning a list of products, and the list is hard-coded. I'll fix the indenting in the next clip, but I'll minimize the files view so you can see this code better. Here it is. It's returning a list of 4 hard-coded products. It uses the new keyword to create an instance of each, and then is using what's called the object initializer syntax in C# to define values for each property. Now let's pop over to the view and get some code added to the model, and then reference it inside the model so that we can see these products in our page on a table listing. I'll change the heading to Products, and then I'll paste in some starter code. It's a basic HTML table, and it'll have a header row with the names of the columns or properties, and then a body with a row for each actual product. We should have 4 of these. I'll paste in the code for the header row now, and fix the indentation. It's using the HTML helper syntax that we just saw on the slide. And the reason this code isn't happy is that we haven't defined the model for our view. I'll do that by adding the @model directive at the top here, and making it an IEnumerable of type product model. That fixes up our header row, which is using the display name for HTML helper to get the names for the properties on the product model class. Each of those will be the value of the th element in the header row, and there's an empty th for an action column. Since we're getting a list of product models here, the table body code is going to be a little bit more interesting. It'll use a razor directive with that @ character to execute a C# for each loop against the model. The exclamation just means that we're letting the compiler know that the model property won't be null here. Then there are curly braces within the for each loop to encapsulate it. Inside it, I've placed a tr element. If we left the code as is, we'd get an empty tr, or table row, for each of our 4 products in the model. To get the data from the individual product into the row, we can add some td elements and use the HTML displayFor helper and reference the item from our for each loop and the property we want. I'll paste in the code for the rest of the properties, and the last column has some action links for edit, details, and delete. That's our view markup. Let's try it. I'll save things and hit F5 to run it. And when I hit our products page, we get an error. The error is showing us the ever-popular null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object, and it's referring to the model in our view. You were probably a step ahead of me here, but I forgot to pass the list of products from the controller to the view. I'll stop the debugger and let's make the change. In the controller, we just need to pass the products property to the view. This property is what we set in the constructor to the list of hard-coded products. If you retype the parentheses on the view method call here, you can actually see that there are 4 overloads for this method. The first one that takes an arg has a string for the view name. The second one takes an object that's the model. And that's what we want, so let's just pass the products property here. I'll run it again. And now when we hit that link for products, we see the listing. Great! When I hit details on a row, it navigates to products details and the ID for the row, but we're getting a 404. Let's add a details view in the next clip.